Now's our chance to ask questions of this group of speakers, and I might kick it off, and I think I'll kick off with a reasonably difficult question, and it's one that's on my mind a lot, and particularly since the release of the latest census data. So I think a lot of us understand that Tasmania is very different from every other jurisdiction in Australia in that about half the community falls into low socio-economic status. And in the last 3 census, so we're going back about 12 years, there's been very, very little movement as far as half our community falling into low SES. To my horror, when the last SES data was released, we've had around another 50,000 people fall into the lowest decile of low SES. And that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting something a little better than that. You know, the economy's picking up. The university has been attracting more students. I thought we might see a glimmer of hope there. So when we think about those people falling into low SES, and we're thinking about our Tasmanian community, and we're thinking about education and training, how might we attract those people who can really use our help so they can participate in a growing ag sector? So I put that question to the panel to start off. And it's a difficult question because it's an issue that's been with us for some time.
Okay, I'll take up the challenge and start off. It is probably one of the biggest issues that we have in Tasmania. I have absolutely no doubt about that. As a university, we have a partial responsibility to address that. When I say partial responsibility, we have a responsibility within the remit of a university of what we can actually do in order to assist people in a transition out of that lowest tercile. What we're doing as a university is that we are increasingly focusing on non-traditional offerings. Because a traditional university degree is something that is very difficult to engage with for somebody at the lowest end of the socioeconomic scale. They don't have the preconditions, they don't have the history, they don't have the understanding, they don't have the encouragement to engage with a university in a traditional sort of sense. So for us, it's very important that we've become a lot more open, a lot more transparent, and also a lot more engaging, so that people actually lose the fear of engaging with an educational institution that we actually are. And that's a long process, that's a difficult process, but what we're doing here today is part of that. And part of our non-traditional offerings are, for instance, what we're doing through the University College at the moment, where we very deliberately provide people with an opportunity to upskill in areas that are relevant for the economy here, and then have the option to either exit after they improve their skills or transition into something that is leads them to a proper university degree. And both options are very valid, but in the past, this didn't exist. There are other non-traditional offerings where we, for instance, have a horticultural masterclass that allows people who are already active in industry, but they don't have the necessary degree or qualification, to have an intensive, very targeted course in order to get the skills that are really relevant for their particular work in horticulture, for instance. And these are the areas that as a university want to grow, but ultimately we want to grow that in order to assist everybody to take that next step and move out of those lower socioeconomic areas, be ambitious enough to do that, be confident enough to do that, and to realize that we are actually there to help people. And it's our purpose as a university to help people to lose their fear of education.
Thanks, Holger. Any final comments on a question like that before I open it up to the floor? What would have Adam Smith have said?
Well, a few things are going through my head, so maybe I'll just share those. So one is that measures of equity and inequity are economic measures. They measure exchange value. So it's possible to be in that low SES category and not actually be poor. You may be doing things that are not involving you in the exchange economy, but nonetheless are generating value. They're generating use value for you and your family. So we need to be, I'm not saying that the metrics are fundamentally wrong, bad, or need to be ignored. I think there is obviously an issue in Tasmania, but I think we also need to realize that a lot of the time we're using metrics that measure exchange value and don't take account of the other values that are in play. And to the extent that that happens right throughout our system, it's a deep problem. Holger, in his presentation on the bioeconomy, talked about the GDP metric, which is the overall driving force for what we do. And it's the overall driving rationale for why politicians do what they do. And it's an enormously problematic metric because all it measures is exchange value. It's not capturing functional value, labor value, or national, state, or community use values. So it's ignoring all those, suggesting that we can simply focus on whether we're exchanging a lot of things, and the more things we're exchanging, the better off we are, and that's a nonsense. So that was what was going through my mind.
Thank you, Fred, and I think a very good point. Someone up the back.
Thank you, everyone. Kathy Evans from TIA, and I hope this question follows on from the last one. Sorry, I just put my glasses on so I can read it. Okay. So regardless of our discipline, we're all generating knowledge that ultimately is about changing people's behaviour. So what a person should eat and when, what a person will buy and how much they'll pay, how a farmer uses water and so on. So what I think is still missing is addressing what we call the no-do gap. And so people may know that their behaviours are unsustainable. We've done knowledge transfer, they have the knowledge, but they may not be empowered to change. So what do you think is the researcher's role in enabling change?
Okay, who will be first?
I guess one of the most greatest opportunities we have to change behaviour is in childhood. So it is we can see that really well when we look at the way in which Australia adopted the Slip, Slop, Slap campaign, the way in which Australia changed behaviour around wearing seatbelts. In the public health space, children are often the greatest adopters of change and are somewhat of a social conscience for adults often. So the responsibility, I think, as a researcher is to excite the youngest of our population to think differently than maybe we did at the same age, and to give the excitement around why we would want to do things differently. That sort of taps into both the fear changing the fear concept about learning and applying that knowledge that Holger talked to. And also, I guess, from Fred's comment about what is it that's valuable doesn't necessarily need to have a dollar value to it. It's about ensuring that people and certainly the society sees that there is an option to do something differently. And I think as researchers and as educators, to excite the youngest of our society is the greatest opportunity we have to change the society as a whole.
Any other comments from the panel?
I think as researchers, we also have an opportunity to come forward and say some of the things that we know need to be said on climate change policy. We need some strong leadership on climate change policy to set the incentives in place. Having the courage to come up and say those things. We need a carbon price. And so that we can manage soils to think about carbon sequestration, getting those institutions in place to manage sustainably into the future.
Holger.
I agree with that comment and would take that a little bit further. I think as scientists, we have a responsibility not just to articulate the problems, but also the solutions. And I think that's where often the debate breaks down, because we are very good at identifying the problems. We're also very good at identifying some solutions, but we're not very good at articulating those, and particularly not good at articulating those in a way that they become actionable for policymakers. And I think that's where we have a big gap still between science and policy, so that policy can become more comfortable in engaging with science because they know they actually get the pieces of information that they need in order to make the appropriate policies for society. And this is where I'm actually looking forward to a much more mature dialogue into the future, particularly here in Tasmania, about where science fits in and how we can assist policymakers of any colour in order to achieve outcomes that we're all passionate about, because deep down, we all want to achieve very similar things.
Thank you. Other questions from the floor? Yes. Here comes the microphone.
Working. Andrew Hall. I've got a vested interest because I'm a grower. I'm doing the horticultural masterclass in horticultural business. We are doing some work with the Menzies Centre on antioxidants in cherries, and I've got a son who's doing medical research. So my question is sort of pointed. I've got two questions. One's pointed at Prof. Byrne, really. Is the first part of your talk, or the first couple of slides, with the research strategy for 2018 to 28, I thought that whole presentation was really good. How aware are current students, firstly, of that whole structure, and how often are they reminded of it going forward in terms of, where we're headed? And then the second question is sort of an old war wound that comes up, but this is really great for TIA and associated staff and the school, but in terms of society, we need industry reps here, and communication, as related to my first question. How do you get the message out to industry leaders to be here?
So in terms of your first part of first question, probably this audience will be more informed than our students with regard to the decadal plan that we have with research. So that's really right at its inception. We have it's just gone through our governance structure, and now it's the responsibility that we have as a College of Health and Medicine to enable research and ideas of our research to infiltrate our, to be a research-led curricula. We're looking as a university very seriously at the honours year and enabling students to get exposed during their undergraduate program to research and to be given every opportunity to see, should they want to themselves, continue in a research pathway. So it's very much a focus of what we're examining within our own curricula at the moment. How do our students know what is the cutting edge of the research that's being performed? And there is always a tension as to what can you fit within a program. Everyone always is vying to ensure that their area gets enough focus, but we are looking very seriously at how do we infuse our curriculum with the sort of cutting edge research that is occurring both here nationally and internationally. In terms of how do we get industry and community engaged with the university, I think it's a brilliant question, and I'm really looking forward to in the north, the move to the Inverness campus, because we want that campus to be very permeable. We want it to be an opportunity that community finds themselves within the university and isn't surprised by that ability to have the community as part of the university will be the testament of how well we do the Northern Transformation change. And we just earlier this last week, the time moves very quickly, we had a public forum, and we enjoyed a small group, but we did enjoy being able to share the ideas with the public in a small way, and it's something that we want to see happening regularly, to have a lot more availability of the research and the ideas of the university being made available to the public, and to find a way to hear the public and industry far more authentically, so that we're collaborators in understanding what the needs of the state are in particular, and how we can focus what we do to best serve the public. And the Inverness move is an incredibly important opportunity for the university to enable that conversation to become more obvious.
Okay, it's a very pertinent question, and so we do want to hear about some practical solutions. Holger.
I want to pick up on the second question, Andrew, and I don't want to answer it myself, but I actually want to ask Pete Leith to say a few words about the project that we are launching today, which actually goes right to the heart of the question that you have asked. So there's a microphone around, Pete.
Thank you, Holger. I think you've been involved in our research, Andrew. I hate to. So we are reaching out as much as possible to the sector. I think it's a real challenge to have the two-way dialogue in an ongoing way, but we've been interviewing people across the agri-food sector to try and understand what the goals and drivers and constraints are in order to develop our research and development strategy going forward. But to get people to come to this room and take time out of their busy lives and businesses is one of the huge challenges we have. How do we actually create the dialogue space? And it's something that we're really looking at going forward, and how you do that in maybe a place-based way or a sectoral way, different setups for different industries. And really interested in continuing this discussion, but I'll be talking more about that project later on, so I won't take any more of your time now.
Any other comments from the panel?
So I think we also need to be a little circumspect about the way we treat the term "the people." So there are people, and there are people in different groups. Industry is certainly one worthy group worth engaging in, but there's an awful lot of other people in Tasmania that we also need to engage with. One of the things that has emerged out of some of the research that I've been doing as part of the Sustainable Food Systems flagship, which I didn't mention, by the way, is that the current agricultural system in Tasmania may be working quite well for industry, but it's certainly not working very well for quite a few marginalized groups in society, and there are a whole range of people who are missing out despite the fantastic produce that's been produced. So why is that? And what's the role of this collaborative effort, if it gets off the ground, in researching that problem and coming up with solutions to it?
Thanks, Fred. Just looking for other questions. Thank you. Jeff.
Thank you, Mark. Jeff Fader, Chair, Rural Business Tasmania. In terms of the I'll use the word connectivity and integration. I'll just share with you information about a study that's being done in New South Wales in the area of primary industry and agriculture at the moment, where university students are spending up to, when I say students, I mean that word broadly, not necessarily undergraduates, are spending periods of time of up to 4 weeks with individual primary producers working alongside them on their property. But the interesting thing is, what are they doing? And the what are they doing is actually drawing the knowledge from the principle of that primary production enterprise and writing it down into the business plan for that enterprise. Because what's been found is the older person or the leader of the primary production enterprise has the knowledge in their head. They actually believe, usually, that their son or daughter, who's their intended successor, knows all about it and knows how to run the future of that enterprise. But if you take the example and talk to that intended successor and say, the old man's just died. You've got to take over running this enterprise, or dare I say the old lady, but I don't mean that in a rude sense. You've got to take over this enterprise and do the things that are necessary to keep it going. And in the short term, they will know when to plough and plant, when to put in a particular crop or when to fertilise or whatever the other activities are. But the real integrated knowledge of the business plan of that enterprise has not actually been communicated and certainly not written down into the business plan. So it does occur to me that using the resources and skills of students in the university in the agricultural areas, that it might be possible to develop an active program here in Tasmania where students might gain knowledge. The primary producer involved would gain an effective business plan for the future of their enterprise, but most importantly, the potential for collaboration could be, I think, achieved, certainly developed, and I'm happy to put that forward as a thought for consideration.
Thank you, Jeff. Could I have a response from a panel member?
No, I think that's it's an excellent idea, and it goes to the heart of what we've started to talk about, which is the fact that we don't need to bombard people with more facts and figures. We actually need to tell stories more effectively. It's about telling convincing stories that are fact-based, but that can engage people. And I mean, I'm not a social researcher, but we all know that only about 10% of the decision making is actually based on rational thought. 90% of that is intuitive. It's from the heart. It's what people engage with, which is exactly the reason why we now believe that as a university we need to have a much more comprehensive, much more holistic approach in order to address issues that are so important for Tasmania, which is our agricultural production base, which are the products that actually come from the land, from the resources that we have, because there is no other place in Australia where that is so important as it is for Tasmania. So what we need to do is we need to tell stories better. We need to tell stories more convincingly, more engagingly. And it goes right back to the opening question from Mark about how do we engage with the people who are normally not engaged with us as a university. And telling stories that matter to people is probably one way of overcoming that.
Thank you, Holger. Any other responses from panel members to that question?
I'll take that suggestion back to the business school, because we've got a lot of work integrated learning projects that are underway, and students get pretty excited about being able to gain practical knowledge and skills. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the floor? Just up the back.
Hello, Kevin Turner from the Regional Development Australia Tasmania Committee. We've heard some really great examples about how the university's been involved in some of our successful food items, aquaculture and whiskey and wine and everything like that. But with this new focus on bioeconomy going into the future, how do you think the university can help set the scope for what new products could be coming through? And have you got any suggestions for what those new products could be?
Start with you, Holger.
Okay, I'll keep that brief. I mean, it's a brilliant question, and I hope you can stay for the afternoon where some of those issues will actually come up. I think Tasmania has unique opportunities and unique challenges, and we need to be aware of those in order to focus where these new products can be. From my perspective, it's all in sort of the value adding. Where can you actually extract or add more value to a primary production process so that we can capitalize on our unique location, geographically, climatically, socially to some extent, and overcome some of the challenges that are associated with it, like, for instance, transport. I mean, the bulk commodities will never work in our favor simply because we are remote and we have big transport issues. So obviously, things that are small, that are light, that are highly valuable, extracting value from biological processes, for instance, is where I can see a great future for Tasmania. I also see the opportunities in the diversity. Tasmania is extremely diverse in terms of its environment, in terms of the opportunities. So it's not just one particular product. It's a range of products. It's about value adding to those products through value chains that are transparent, and through that transparency allows us to make them really profitable and sustainable.
Thanks, Holger. Any other comments from the panel? Any questions from the floor? Yep, just up the back here.
G'day, Tim Lester from the Council of Rural R&D Corporations, which means that I represent about $600 million of investment in R&D annually through the universities and CSIRO and the like. So first off, I actually just wanted to congratulate you for this conversation, because I see lots of these sorts of things and they're generally locked in the business of today. And I don't think this conversation is. It's actually somewhere else, which is in itself an interesting question, and it sort of goes to the point of who you've got in the room and all that sort of stuff. What I actually really want to understand, and so congratulations, Holger, and to Tia, and because I see something happening in southern Queensland, I see something happening through the University of Sydney. What I think you've got the opportunity to do here is state-based, and no one else can do it. So keep going, you're going hard. My question probably for the university is, in this space, change is as much about loss as gain, and collaboration, in some ways, putting a black hat on, is about, are you sacrificing time, money or authority? So the question for the university is this actually, to use a pejorative term, lipstick on a pig? Are you just window dressing here? Or at what point do you know that this is actually sort of a fundamental transformational cultural shift that you've made institutionally, rather than continuing to work in disciplinary silos and fund it and sort of do what you've always done?
Okay, we've got the lipstick on the pig question, and I think everyone should have the opportunity to make a response to that from the panel.
Well, I'll kick off. The interesting thing comes from with transformational change is that the value proposition to move must be greater than the reason to stay. So we have a good push need within the university. We are a small university, relatively speaking, and from a research perspective, right across Australia, there is a funding limit, and it is very, very difficult to be doing everything. And so we have a need to be smarter, and we have the requirement through some good leadership within the university, which is pushing us to reconsider how we allow ourselves to invest our time into a broad base of research. We're not being given that opportunity, which is actually quite good. It's forcing us to think about what is the intersection between the areas of research that we may want to work with. And I think my thought previously went to the way in which we're driven as researchers, because it is a competitive blood sport often, to get research funds, is the greed side is what drives. It's an individual pursuit. You get promoted or you get acknowledged often through an individual portfolio of achievement. And we're being asked and appropriately challenged to do that through team-based recognition now. And I think it's the only way that University of Tasmania is going to really be meaningful to the state. I've only been at UTAS 2 years, and I come from Brisbane, so there are 8 universities within a 200-kilometre radius, all with 40,000 students. So competition isn't necessarily a bad thing. It helps sort of focus the mind. But a smaller budget is also a very good way to recognise, for us to achieve for the state and for us to achieve as individuals within an organisation. There is no option but to work together. And so we are not only get a push factor, we also have a pull factor to be able to do that. And I think sometimes the stick and the carrot need to work together to get that outcome.
Thank you. Other comments, Fred?
Well, collaboration is very difficult, and it's very easy for groups to form with similar values and to assume that those values are the same as everyone else's, and therefore, in a sense, you don't need to collaborate because you have all the values you need in your segment. And I think one of the great things about this initiative is that it at least challenges that presumption. There are deep-rooted cleavages between people who work in the sciences, people who work in the social sciences, and people who work in the humanities. And one of the difficulties of making this collaboration work is going to be having people recognize the limits of their own ontological and epistemological positions. Those are big words, but basically a lot of people in the sciences believe that they are studying reality as it really is and developing facts as they really are, and therefore producing truth with a capital T as it has to be seen. And that's a big problem if you come at the world from the social sciences and the humanities perspective. There are deep-rooted discussions to be had about the nature of inquiry and the tools we use to investigate what this thing is that we like to call reality.
Some final comments?
Tim, thanks for that. I truly hope that we can move beyond the window dressing. We've been talking about the importance of intern transdisciplinarity for decades. Nobody is doing it perfectly. I haven't seen the perfect model. what is often missing is a true understanding of why we're actually doing it. That common sense of purpose. And you're absolutely right. If there is one place in Australia where we might make progress, it can be in Tasmania, because we are one university. We have a really good working relationship with a lot of the community and with the state government. And through something like the bioeconomy for society, we can actually provide a focal point, that common sense of purpose that we all want to contribute to. And that is something that I'm very passionate about. I want to provide that sort of platform in order to tap into that deep knowledge and that expertise that actually sits right across that university. And we need to find a way of tapping into that, getting people excited, getting them involved. And it won't be a smooth ride. I mean, Fred already challenged us about quite a few of our assumptions. But that's exactly what it is about. It's having those conversations in a confident but also in a safe environment, that we can disagree with each other, but we can still create that sort of common sense of purpose. And I can see it happening. I'm very positive about that. I can see that UTAS is actually at the cusp of making a major transition in that direction.
Now, we've just been allowed one more question by our fearless leader, and so let's pass the microphone to Hazel.
Thanks. Hazel McTavish West, just on the TIA board as well. I just wanted to say, corroborate what was said earlier about what a great day this is, and talking about safe environments, whether you could run an event like this where the public come along. And because I think what we've heard, even I engage with parts of the university, I've learnt so much just by seeing what the other departments are doing, and I think that's really great and important for the involvement of the community in the university. And also iterate something Andrew said about farmers and getting them involved. At Hawke Connections last week, the room was packed when the farmers were up on stage talking about their businesses, and they all left the room when the academics started talking about the research. And I think, that if we're in the business of agriculture, we need to be helping them tell their stories, not us telling our stories. Sorry, I'm including myself as us there. Thanks. There was a question in there. When are you going to do this publicly?
Okay, when are you going to do it? Holger.
Well, I'm sort of dominating here, and that's not the intent of a panel discussion. It's certainly the intent. I mean, that's where we need to get to ultimately. And you're right. It's everybody needs to tell their story, and it's not about the farmer versus the scientist. We need to tell stories that involve all of them, and we need to tell these stories together. And that togetherness is something that we haven't achieved yet, but it's certainly something that we need to work towards. And when? Well, we are starting the conversation right now, and I hope that it will develop fairly rapidly from here on.